Hi, I'm a professor of political science, and before that, I was a policy advisor in the United States Senate. Today, I want to talk you through some of the really interesting political tactics that I saw in season 1 of The West Wing. In this first scene, President Bartlet is deciding how to respond to Syria blowing up a plane full of American doctors. The Joint Chiefs of Staff proposed to bomb a few Syrian military targets in what they call a proportional response, but President Bartlet thinks that the proportional response is way too lenient.
What is the virtue of a proportional response?
It isn't virtuous, Mr. President. It's all there is, sir.
It is not all there is.
Sir, Admiral Fitzwallace.
Excuse me, Leo. Pardon me, Mr. President. Just what else is there?
The disproportional response. Let the word ring forth from this time and this place, gentlemen. You kill an American, any American, we don't come back with a proportional response. We come back with total disaster.
Mr. President, are you suggesting we carpet bomb Damascus?
I am suggesting, General, that you and Admiral Fitzwallace and Secretary Hutchison and the rest of the national security team take the next 60 minutes and put together an American response scenario that doesn't make me think we are just docking somebody's damn allowance.
Now, there's a huge power imbalance here because President Bartlet does not have the capacity to draw up his own war plans. You need real military expertise. And actually, one of the generals drew his attention to that.
Mr. President, are you suggesting we carpet bomb Damascus?
Pointing out that Bartlet was unable to articulate an alternative plan. Of course he wasn't, right? You have to be a general who knows about all the military assets, who knows how all these things work. Bartlet relies on the Joint Chiefs of Staff to develop those plans for him. And this creates what is called an agenda setting game. The agenda setter curates a menu of options, and then a decider picks which of those options to implement. In this case, the Joint Chiefs of Staff are the agenda setter because they're the ones with the military expertise necessary to put together these battle plans. And President Bartlet is the decider because the Constitution makes him the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. And in these agenda setting games, the agenda setter has a huge advantage over the decider, and you're about to see why.
Mr. President, we put together a scenario by which we attack Hassan Airport. Its 3 main terminals and 2 runways. In addition to the civilian casualties, which could register in the thousands, the strike would temporarily cripple the region's ability to receive medical supplies and bottled water. Now, I think Mr. Cashman and Secretary Hutchinson would each tell you what I'm sure you already know, sir, that this strike would be seen both at home and abroad as a staggering overreaction by a first-time commander-in-chief. That without the support of our allies, without a Western coalition, without Great Britain and Japan, and without Congress, you'll have doled out $5,000 worth of punishment for a $50 crime, sir.
Admiral Fitzwallace played this perfectly. He gave the president 2 options: the wimpy proportional response that President Bartlet already said he didn't like, and then this way too aggressive plan that he knows is going to be totally unacceptable to President Bartlet. And when you're the agenda setter, that's exactly what you do. You can get the decider to pick basically any option you want. All you have to do is make all the other options on the menu even worse. So this is a fantastic illustration of how you use agenda power to control another person. I think this was really well written. And one thing I like a lot is that it worked in this scene. And in fact, in the resolution of the scene, Admiral Fitzwallace rubs it in a little bit, and President Bartlet shows that he knows he just got played.
Well done, Mr. President.
$50 crime? I honestly don't know what the hell we're doing here.
Now, if you're President Bartlet, how do you avoid these sorts of situations? Well, one option is just to be a military expert yourself. This wouldn't happen to presidents like Dwight Eisenhower or Ulysses S. Grant or George Washington or Andrew Jackson or William Henry Harrison, because they were generals who would know what was possible and who would be able to articulate and develop their own war plans. Now, obviously, President Bartlet was a civilian, so there's no way for him to have that sort of expertise. So his other option is to fire the Joint Chiefs of Staff and replace them with people who are more aligned with him, but that would carry all kinds of political costs. A third option, maybe a more realistic option, would be for President Bartlett to cultivate other sources inside the Pentagon who might disagree with Admiral Fitzwallace and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and might want to get their own ideas onto that menu. When you've got an agenda setter, as the decider, the best thing that you can do is break their agenda control by giving other people the option to add things to the menu. Next up, the Bartlett administration is trying to pass a gun control bill, but to do that, they need to round up a few more votes. We're going to watch as different members of the Bartlett administration try to flip different members of Congress. First up, we've got White House Deputy Chief of Staff Josh Lyman, and he is going to try to flip Representative Katzenmoyer.
The NRA makes me a target. The next election I lose, plain and simple. Ask me 2 years from now, I'll be there for you.
So Katzenmoyer is playing the get out of jail free card. If you say that you cannot vote for a bill because that will cause you to lose re-election, most of the time that will get whoever's trying to pressure you to back off, because it shows them that they don't have much leverage. What can they do to you that is worse than causing you to lose re-election?
55,000 more people will be shot and killed with guns 2 years from now, but that's very much beside the point.
What is your point?
Forgive my bluntness, and I say this with all due respect, Congressman, but vote yes, or you're not even going to be on the ballot 2 years from now.
How do you figure?
You're going to lose in the primary.
There's no Democrat running against me.
Sure there is.
Who?
Whomever we pick.
You're bluffing.
Okay.
I'm in your own party.
It doesn't seem to be doing us much good now, does it?
Generally speaking, it is not a good idea to back a primary challenger against a member of your own party. First of all, you totally poison your relationship with them, and so they're not going to be willing to help you in the future. Second of all, any resources you devote towards helping their primary challenger are resources you're not using to beat members of the other party and flip those seats to your own party. That's a problem because if you're a Democratic president, the least reliable Democrat in Congress is going to vote with you way more often than the friendliest Republican would. Now, even though it's generally not a good idea, presidents have done this before. FDR did this, and President Trump is doing this right now. But the circumstances in which they were doing it were very different. FDR had an overwhelming Democratic majority, and so he didn't really need to devote any resources towards beating the Republicans. And President Trump is also in possession of a congressional majority and also is quite willing to use presidential power to do things on his own without a lot of input from Congress. President Bartlett is not in that situation. He doesn't have a commanding Democratic majority. In fact, there's a Republican majority, so he really can't afford to divert resources away from beating the Republicans and towards punishing members of his own party. And it's shown that President Bartlett, as most presidents of this era were, is not especially willing to really bypass Congress to get the things he wants done. So Representative Katzenmoyer is right to be skeptical as to whether the Bartlett administration is really serious about doing this. But Josh sells it well, and if Katzenmoyer did think that the Bartlett administration was serious about backing a primary challenger, then it would be reasonable for him to back down and vote for the bill. Next up, Leo McGarry, the White House Chief of Staff, is trying to flip Representative Richardson.
You need this one, Mark.
I'm voting no, Leo.
Mark, it's all we could get right now, and you know it.
You didn't work hard enough.
We did?
What happened to the Tech DC-9 and the Tech 22? What happened to the Striker 12 and the Street Sweeper?
We had to lose them.
You never fought for them.
All right, this is a very different situation than we had in the last clip. Representative Katzenmoyer opposed the bill because he thought it went too far. Representative Richardson opposes the bill because he thinks it doesn't go far enough. And this does happen. We see people voting against bills because they view them as not extreme enough all the time in the House Republican Conference, and House Democrats do this too. The Squad in particular is pretty infamous for this. In fact, they do it so often that our statistical methods that we use to try to calibrate how liberal or conservative a member of Congress is based on their voting record actually get confused and think that members of the squad like AOC are moderates because it sees all these instances where they vote with Republicans against Democrats. So these sorts of things do come up. When they come up, you have a few options. One really simple one is to offer Representative Richardson the opportunity to offer an amendment to make the bill stronger. And if Leo is right that it couldn't pass, then they won't be out anything. And if it does pass, they'll end up with a stronger bill. So that's one way to do this. Another way to do this, if you have the majority party in the House of Representatives, is to pass a cover bill. I explained how that works in my video about cover bills. But the third option, and in my opinion, the best option in a lot of circumstances like this, is to use a trick that Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill used to use back in the 1970s, 1980s. O'Neill would take these troublesome representatives like Richardson and bring them into the leadership group and give them the responsibility for counting votes for a bill. So for this bill, it would be Richardson's job to take the pulse of different members of Congress and assess whether they were likely to vote for this bill or not. That does a couple things. So one, it gives them a sense of ownership over the bill, which is going to make them more likely to vote for it. Second of all, it helps them to see things from your perspective. If you're Representative Richardson, it's really easy to sit in your office by yourself and think, oh, gee, wouldn't it be better if this bill were more stringent? But when you're the person who's actually out there having to talk to people and hear about what they think about the bill and see the difficulties associated with building a coalition behind it, you are much more appreciative of the compromises that have to be made, and you are much more likely to vote for compromise bills over registering these sorts of protest votes that we see Representative Richardson saying that he's going to do. So there's a bunch of good options. Let's see what Leo does.
God, Mark. The bodies being wheeled into the emergency rooms are black. These guns aren't going to Scottsdale, Mark. They're going to Detroit. They're going to Philadelphia. An entire generation of African-American men are being eaten alive by drugs and poverty.
Well, I'm encouraged to hear the White House has discovered there's a drug problem in this country. I mean, your penetrating insight is matched only by the courage displayed in the authorship of this bill.
Oh, Mark, for God.
Not the 3-inch grip, but the 2-inch grip, with the 40-gauge barrel, and the 30-round clip, not the 20-round clip, with a 3-day wait to run a check to see if you're crazy. As if wanting the gun wasn't a pretty good heads up in the first place. Oh, this is for show. And I think it's an unconscionable waste of the taxpayers' money to have it printed, signed, and photocopied, to say nothing of enforced. No, I want the guns, Leo. You write a law that can save some lives, I'll sign it. In the meantime, please don't tell me how to be a leader of black men. You look like an idiot.
That was, hands down, the worst thing Leo could have tried. There are, to be clear, cases where it can be helpful to just explain why the bill is good. When you're dealing with really technical issues that the member hasn't thought a lot about before, yeah, these sorts of pitches can be useful. But that's clearly not the case here. Representative Richardson has already shown that he knows the details of this bill and this policy area inside and out, and Leo ought to know that he isn't telling him anything he doesn't already know. And so when you do this, it does two things. First of all, it pisses the member off because it seems to them that you're being condescending. It's like, you seriously think I didn't already think about this? And second, it shows that member that you have no idea what you're doing. Now, even though this is a bad idea, this does happen sometimes. Politicians make mistakes. In fact, Mitch McConnell in his autobiography claimed that Barack Obama was really prone to this. He would bring people out to the White House, and then he would lecture them as to why the bill he wanted them to vote for was a good idea. And McConnell thought, doesn't he get that, like, I don't disagree with him because I lack the information that he has. I disagree with him because I have a different point of view. Why is he wasting our time with these lectures? Why doesn't he just acknowledge that we have different perspectives and then try to figure out what he can give me? It would compensate me for voting for this bill. Now, we should take what Mitch McConnell says about Barack Obama with a grain of salt. But you know, this idea is out there. It did not work on McConnell very well. And if somebody tried this in real life, I expect it would not work very well on them either. I expect you would get this sort of incredulous, what are you, an idiot response that you see Representative Richardson giving in this clip. Now we've got Vice President John Hoynes, who is going to try to flip Representative Tillinghouse.
I'm voting my conscience.
I know.
You can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. 240 million guns out there. How you gonna get them back?
You can't.
Of course not. Well, as long as they got a gun, I want my wife to have a gun. I want my daughter to have a gun. And damn it, I want one too.
Makes perfect sense.
Already, I see something that I really like. Representative Tillinghast is talking through all of the reasons he doesn't like the bill, and Hoynes is not arguing with him. He is just sitting there, listening, acknowledging his concerns. It's very important to remember that politics is not a debating society. The goal isn't always to win the argument on the merits. The goal is to get other people to do what you need them to do. And being a good listener, like Hoynes is right now, can be a really important step to that.
Reality is reality.
Yes, which is why I'd like very much for you to do the following, Cal. I want you to vote yes on the resolution.
John?
And you might want to mention this conversation to Representatives Katzenmoyer, O'Bannon, LeBrandt, and Wick.
Well, John, you do seize the moment, don't you?
You got a roll call?
Tell me something. What's in it for me?
Right now?
Yeah.
Nothing?
Then why am I handing you a personal political victory?
Because I'm going to be president of the United States one day and you're not.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Vice President Hoynes acknowledges that there are all sorts of reasons for Tillinghast to vote against the bill, asks him to vote yes anyways as a favor, and reminds him why it might be a good idea to do Hoynes a favor. That could absolutely work in the real world, assuming that Vice President Hoynes had established that he was the kind of guy who would repay past favors. And Hoynes was a senator for 8 years before becoming the vice president, so it's very likely that he has. This, in fact, is something that Speaker of the House Sam Rayburn, who for my money has a very good claim on being the most effective Speaker of the House of all time, used to do a lot. He wouldn't try to argue with representatives. He would just go right up to them and say, look, I know you want to vote no, but I really need you to vote yes on this, and I would appreciate it if you did me the favor. And because Sam Rayburn had this sterling reputation as a guy who would help the people who had helped him, and because as Speaker of the House, Rayburn was a very powerful person who would be in a lot of positions to help you, way more often than you would think, that simple asking for a favor was enough to get people on board. This is something that's not just true in politics. I think this is actually a great life lesson. Very often we get into this persuasion mode where we want to convince people that what we're trying to get them to do is actually in their interest. But often it can be a lot more effective to acknowledge that, no, this may not be in your short-term interest, but I want you to know that I appreciate that you are doing a favor for me. I'm going to remember that. And if I'm ever in a position to help you out in the future, which I probably will be, I'm sure to do it. So this is great. This is a real influence tactic that has been used in Congress and is used in Congress all the time. And the way Hoynes deployed it here, I think it would have a very good chance of working. I also just want to say, Vice President Hoynes is my favorite character in the West Wing. He is by far the most politically sophisticated member of the Bartlett administration. In fact, I would argue that he is the only member of the Bartlett administration who seems to know what he's doing. I really like how the writers have set it up so that every time Hoynes comes into conflict with one of the other members of the Bartlett administration, Hoynes runs circles around them. In this next scene, C.J. Craig, the White House press secretary, is taking a meeting with an environmental advocacy group. And this scene was a lot of fun for me because these sorts of meetings used to be part of my job. Now, normally a group like this wouldn't meet with the press secretary. They would meet with a member of the policy team like me, because usually they're asking for something on policy. But that's actually cleared up in this episode. Chief of Staff Leah McGarry is forcing senior staffers who wouldn't normally take these sorts of meetings to take them. And we're about to see why that is not a good idea.
The Wolves-only roadway?
1,800 miles from Yellowstone to the Yukon Territory, complete with highway overpasses and no cattle grazing.
An 1,800-mile wolves-only roadway?
Pluie, you'll recall, had to...
Hang on. How are you going to teach wolves to follow road signs?
Our scientists are working on a plan.
Yeah, but in the meantime, Pluie's going to get drunk and wander off the wolves-only road and end up eating my cat.
We don't think that'll happen.
I don't think this is going to happen.
Anyone who has done this job for real has had this exact experience where there's some group that is totally clueless and asking you for something that you could not possibly give them. And when this happens, you gotta keep your best poker face on.
Perhaps we should...
First of all, ranchers don't want wolves returned to the West.
Ranchers are killers.
No, they're not. And anyone who says it should take it back. Ranchers face the following conditions: falling stock prices, rising taxes, prolonged drought, and a country that's eating less beef. Ranchers want to blame something, and because they're ranchers, they want to fight something. I'd rather it be a wolf than us, so unless Pluie registers to vote...
Pluie was shot and killed by a rancher in British Columbia last month.
I'm sorry to hear that.
I'm not sure you are.
Yeah, this is not going well. You got to remember that these meetings are not a debate. It's not your job to win the argument. It is your job to make your boss look good. And CJ is not making President Bartlett look good to this group.
Just out of curiosity, how much would it cost?
That's the beauty part. With contributions and corporate sponsorship, the cost to the taxpayer is only $900 million.
No, seriously, how much would it cost?
CJ, if we're gonna do this, why not do it right?
We're not gonna do it.
You know, the way CJ is approaching this meeting would actually be fine if she were meeting with a high-powered K Street lobbyist. If you're one of those lobbyists, your job is to ask the person you're meeting with for the biggest thing that they're actually willing to give you. So if you're the staffer and one of these lobbyists asks you for too much, you can just tell them no, and that's fine. The lobbyists will just go back to whoever hired them and explain what happened and come up with a plan for a different thing to ask for, and then come back and ask you for something else. And they don't take it personally, it's just part of their job. But with an amateur group like this group, they are much more likely to take rejection personally. You gotta remember that these people obviously care about this issue a lot. They worked really hard on this presentation. They came probably a long way to meet with you, and they probably don't get to meet with high officials in government very often. So it is important that you show them respect and that you ensure they leave this meeting feeling good. And most importantly, they leave this meeting liking President Bartlett. So what I would do if I were in CJ's shoes is I would first thank them for bringing this issue to our attention. I would then inform them about some of the other things that the Bartlett administration was doing to advance the interests of conservation, which is the issue they care about. And then I would promise to forward this proposal to either the Secretary of the Interior or to the President himself. But CJ blew this one. I think they would have been better off not taking the meeting. It would be much better if this group thought that the Bartlett administration was inaccessible and aloof than to take the meeting and then have CJ treat them like they're idiots because now they think that the Bartlett administration is full of jerks. In the next scene, Leo is trying to influence FEC Commissioner Barry Haskell to vote a certain way on a regulatory decision regarding soft money. But Barry catches on to how Leo is trying to manipulate him.
And I noticed that I'm sitting here in the chief of staff's office and with all the trappings of the White House.
Barry.
And my wife and her friends say it's not uncommon for people to get lightheaded and starstruck. And I've heard the same thing from other people too.
Nonsense.
No, it's not nonsense. This is totally a real thing. Most of us have a hardwired predisposition to defer to people who are higher status than we are. There is tons of work on this in evolutionary psychology. There's tons of evidence on it in social psychology. There's a really famous experiment from the 1960s where psychologists drove their car up to an intersection and stopped. And then the light turned green and they stayed stopped. And they waited to see if the car behind them was going to honk at them or not before the light turned red. It depended on what kind of car the psychologists were driving. When they were driving a regular car, they got honked at 80% of the time. But when they were driving a fancy car that suggested they were high status, they only got honked at 50% of the time. People treat higher status people differently. That's why my dad always insisted when I was growing up that I have a nice suit that I could wear to business meetings. That's why right now I'm recording this video in front of this very fancy bookshelf that my university got me and all of these political science books to convey my status as a professor. If you are attuned to status dynamics, you can often get people to do things that they otherwise would not do. And nobody is higher status than the President of the United States. And this actually poses a problem for the President of the United States in certain circumstances. When there's a meeting and the President expresses an opinion on how a particular issue should be decided, often people who are in the room who might have expertise and might know that that's not a good idea will sit there and not say anything because it is so uncomfortable to contradict somebody who is as high status as the President of the United States. So actually, one really important part of the job of the White House Chief of Staff is to make sure before meetings that everybody in the meeting knows exactly what information they need to convey to the President, and then to create an atmosphere in which those people feel empowered to express their opinion to the President, even if they think that's something the President might not want to hear. But anyways, this strategy of using the trappings of the White House to convey status and using that to try to influence somebody to behave the way you want them to behave, this thing that Leo's doing, absolutely something that gets done all the time in Washington. Very often when the president needs somebody to do something, inviting them to the White House and just asking them in the White House will be enough to get it done. Totally realistic and very perceptive of Barry, or at least very perceptive of Barry's wife and her friends, to notice that this is what would happen.
Let me show you around the place.
If I could just get a glass of water.
No problem. We keep it in here. Mr. President, I'm so sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. We're just having a nightcap.
I'd like you to meet Barry Haskell from the FEC.
Oh, may I present Treasury Secretary Kenneth?
Ken Cato, how are you?
Mr. Attorney General?
Dan Larson.
Of course, CIA Director Rob Conrad.
It's good to see you.
Barry, I'm Jed Bartlett. I understand you're thinking about helping us out. That makes me so happy.
Sometimes these influence tactics work, even if you know that somebody's using them on you. Now, one little directing detail that I really like about this scene is that you'll notice everybody else in the room has a better fitting suit than Barry has. And all of them are standing in wider, more open, more relaxed stances, really conveying those status dynamics. And this is something that's not just done well in this scene, this is something that's done really well throughout the rest of the show. In fact, including in some of the clips that I've already shown you. The directors are very good at visually conveying the way status works in this political world, which I thought was just so cool. Overall, I really liked The West Wing. I know some of the little procedural details were not quite right, but the political tactics were true to life. And the pressures they put on people and the tension they create and the way people respond to these political tactics, those were totally true to life. And I also appreciate how the writers recognize that the way they would like politics to work, which is embodied by how the main characters approach politics, and the way politics actually works, which is embodied by Vice President Hoynes and some of the members of Congress, are two different things. And I think it takes guts to do what they did, which is to show that realistic version of politics trouncing the idealistic version of politics when they come into conflict. So I enjoyed this show. I am definitely looking forward to watching the second season. If you're a person who's watched my content before, you'll note that this is a little different from what I normally do, a little broader, a little less focused. I'm definitely planning to make more videos like I've been making before this one, but if you like this kind of content too, be sure to leave a like and to let me know in the comments so we can do something like this again. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.